This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to the Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Kathryn and I are excited to have Mike Stop Continues back with us on the show. If you missed last week's episode, we were talking about theme in pre-writing, and now we're going to talk about theme in revision. Mike is an author who lives on 2 continents. He writes 2 genres, urban fantasy and literary fiction, and you can find him at mikestopcontinues.com. So, welcome back, Mike.
Thanks for having me. How are you?
Oh, good. We are good. And, you know, if people are watching on YouTube, they see the clothing hasn't changed, the background hasn't changed, but, you know, right, they come out a week apart. So we say welcome back at the top of the show, like we haven't seen you for ages.
It's been a really long time.
Yes.
I did miss you.
Yes. Yeah.
Animal practice is going a long way.
Yes. Yeah, we're a little slap happy today, maybe too. So, all right, theme and revision. So again, if you missed it, listen to last week's episode, theme and pre-writing, and of course, links to previous shows about theme if you want more of a grounding in themes. So we're talking about subtext, deep emotional content, character arc, universal meaning of being a human being here, and how do we work all of that into our story in revision? What is theme's role in revision?
So for me, it's
sure.
I like to I like to aim to have every word expressing theme. So I feel like when you have a bad book in front of you, the parts that you skim are the parts that don't have theme.
Right.
So first thing to go is description, next thing is action, finally it's dialogue, right? And that's when you put the book down. But
yeah.
The idea is that if you can fill up all of the facts with meaning, then a reader is going to want to read every word. And so that's my goal when I'm doing revision.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so saying every word needs to address theme sounds really heavy and
yeah, I'm gonna say tall.
yeah, tall order. But if we can go to that last thing you said, which is meaningfulness, let's make every part of the story meaningful. So within a scene, you're going to have description, you're going to have dialogue, or, you know, maybe not, but you're going to have action, maybe thoughts, whatever craft elements occur within that scene, make sure that they are meaningful. And then, you know, maybe it doesn't seem quite so daunting, but it's really saying the same thing in 2 different ways. Make sure that every word addresses theme, i.e. has meaning relevant to that story, to the characters' lessons that then translate into the reader's lessons, that thing we carry forward from a book into our lives.
Right. I like that you broke it down, though. What did you say? You said first goes description and then goes action and then goes dialogue. So is that like the order in which you evaluate your thematic content, or?
Exactly, right. Because the thing basically, I also think it's actually easiest to fix description, which is also the part that people are most likely to skip. So it's sort of like basically you've got these, paragraph or 2 paragraphs of description about a setting or the introduction of a character, or basically those are the 2 main things, or sometimes just long spans of thought or whatever. But that stuff, I think it's the easiest to fix because it's already doing the least out of everything that's in your book, right? With dialogue, you're naturally doing multiple things at once, right? So you already have layers in dialogue, but with description, you're really just conveying factual information. And so if you can make it so that it's not just saying the facts, it's not just saying it's a house on a hill or it's, a tree in the woods. If you could make it so that it's actually that tree means something to the theme and that house means something to the theme, that sort of thing makes a difference. It gives that extra bit of texture that makes a reader care about what house it is.
Yeah, I like what you said there, and I'm really glad you said it because I was going to have to take a little issue with the idea that description is the least of what we do, because you have to introduce your setting, you have to do your world building, you have to create mood and atmosphere, and so if you, as you said, it's not just a tree in the woods, it's not just a house on a hill, it has to have meaning. And so we build that meaning with the mood, with the symbolism, with all of those subtextual elements that bring something to life. And I think, and you two can, let me know if you think of it differently as writers, but I think when we make our descriptions meaningful, we end up using more words, not fewer, because you go from there's a house on a hill to there's a house on a hill that has this particular atmosphere that represents this particular thing in the setting I'm describing that is going to be important to my reader because of this thing that I'm building into my narrative. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I do agree. I am. I think is probably also why my focus on description and that exact thing is what makes my descriptions, I think, maybe a little bit longer than average. I don't know. I mean, you're my editor. You could tell me.
Well, I love narrative exposition. I am a big fan of it, but it has to pull its weight. If it's bogging down your story, then, if it's not meaningful, if it's not creating any of those things we've just listed for the reader, then it's filler and it needs to be cut, right? So I have no issue with longer descriptions unless they're not doing their job. Yeah, which is addressing theme, right? That's what we're talking about here, is making that meaning.
So maybe the question is how do we how do you transform a regular description into a thematic description, right?
Right.
That I don't know if I have very a good method for this, but so I'm curious if you two have a good method for it. I know what the beginning and end points are, not necessarily how I get there.
Well, okay, so again, thinking about my current writing project, if I'm just bringing in the outside world to remind the reader we've got a specific setting and it's a specific time of year, it might be very brief, like half a sentence, like someone closes their coat tighter because it's chilly or the sky is gray, right? And that is just keeping us on Earth. But if it's something where I need to make meaning, then I'm going to look for a specific detail that is representing what I want to convey to the reader. So an example is this cottage where the girls live at the School for the Feeble-Minded, 1920s Minnesota. There's a lounge separate from the girls' dorm rooms. And the girls tend to go there after dinner because their matron put a radio in the room. So if we're looking at why is this meaningful, how does this affect theme? Well, that radio brings the outside world into this institution, and that jazz music represents freedom and liberty. And think about the flappers and the speakeasies and all the things that were happening in America in the 1920s. And they can't get it except for this hour a night when the matron lets them turn on the radio and, just be girls instead of these kind of inmates at this institution. So when you look at these scenes, you have to ask, what is this description doing? Why does it matter to my protagonist, my larger story, my theme, my reader, that the girls congregate around the radio? Right? And if you can answer that, then it's working for you. And if you can't find that piece of that scene, it probably needs to be cut or revised.
that actually that brings up the idea of like when your description it's structurally similar
Mm-hmm.
to your character's arc or the theme, or
Mm-hmm.
when it's the opposite, right? Like you could have a situation where maybe those two, let's just say some other two girls in the 1920s are in
Uh-huh.
a situation where they're dancing around with flappers, but they
Mm-hmm.
and yet they still don't feel free, right? So you could
Yeah.
you could use the feeling juxtaposed against the setting to
Yes.
give rise to theme in a
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's that choice of, do I complement or do I contrast?
yeah.
Right. And so my protagonist isn't out of the school yet, but she will be at some point in the
Mm-hmm.
story. And then she will have the freedom to go to a speakeasy, to dance, to meet boys, whatever. So then I have to ask, as myself as the writer, how will that compare to the scene at the school? Is it going to live up to our expectations? Is it going to be a letdown? Is it going to be dangerous? Maybe the prison wasn't the school. Maybe the prison is being a young single
Mm-hmm.
female in the 1920s.
Mm.
Maybe, maybe the prison is in her mind. Maybe, right? So you've got to look at all the different ways your thematic issue can play out in your character's life
Mm-hmm.
over the course of that arc. And, creating that mirror or that parallel between the first exposure to the music on the radio and then that potentially big release of actually being in a club with live
Mm-hmm.
musicians. Yeah, I don't know yet how
Yeah.
that'll play out. It'll be fun to see.
Cool, cool. Um,
So how do you know when you're writing description, I know we talked a little bit about how you said when you're centering people on where you are, right? Setting, like, oh, the sky is gray or,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. That's not necessarily super thematic, right? How do you
Right.
know when you're writing something setting wise, right, that is also thematic? Do you know what I'm saying? So you're centering them like, this is where you are, and then
Mm-hmm.
also making that a thematic moment.
Mm-hmm.
I actually I could offer an example from this.
Yeah.
So the Graffiti Magic prequel novella, it takes place in Coney Island, which is this little place where there's been a whole bunch of amusement parks, and like every single one of these amusement parks have burned down. It's just over and over and over again for the last 100 years, burn after burn after burn, and all of these places are places where people go to experience their dreams, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the theme of my story is following your dreams is irresponsible, but there's no reason to live if not for your dreams. So like
Mm-hmm.
so all of these people over and over go to this island to live out their dreams, and it ends in ashes every single time. So like that's a way that you could embed theme into your setting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for
Right.
me, it was a place that exists, but I mean, you could easily make one up that like that.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's such a great example. That's powerful, and it's so bizarre that is real. That's the real history of Coney Island. All of those fires. Kathryn, were you going to start saying something?
No, it made me think about what I'm doing right now in my pre-writing. Like literally, did you see the light bulb happen? Ah, oh,
Yeah,
okay.
that's why I was like, over to Kathryn.
Kathryn had a quick, where's my journal moment.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, I'll just go run with another example here. In The Murder in Skog Hall, the main setting is this farmhouse that's haunted. And so, of course, the house is central to the entire story, haunted house story. It has to be. So Jess is newly divorced. So her backstory right before the book opens is that she lost her home. Part of that divorce proceeding, of course, is now where do I go, right? The home I made is no more. And the ghost haunting the house is a woman who was murdered there 40 years prior to this. And the previous owner before Jess happens to have been another single woman who gave up on the house, and the house was foreclosed on because she couldn't deal with the ghost. So there's all of this concern theme around what is home? When is home safe? How do you make it safe? When do you walk away from it? So just by nature of my setting being a haunted house and then dealing with these female characters, I'm looking at that theme I keep turning around, turning to of, independence, and specifically women's independence in a world that isn't supporting that. Right. So, and I think a lot of that was subconscious as well, where the theme is just percolating in the back of your mind. But as I wrote those plot elements and developed those characters, the central setting, that home, you can't separate it from that theme.
Right.
So, Kathryn?
So you've got to literally, like when you're pre-writing the theme, as we talked about last episode, like get your setting in there too, all your world building, all around theme.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so there's description, and then what was the next thing that you mentioned, Mike? Action?
Action, yeah.
Action.
So, because at least I find that if I'm reading a bad book, I will read the dialogue, to get to the end of it, but not necessarily the stuff between. But so action is this is another one where you could do those two sides of it, right? You could do the side where the action is a symbol of the character's journey towards theme or away from theme, or you could do the opposite, where it's depending on the debate surrounding your theme, right? So like if you have a character that's stubborn, right, you could have them doing something incredibly easy the hardest way possible, right? And so it's sort of a representation of what's going on here. Or like if you've got a character who's determined to live without love, then he's like also trying to get used to taking cold showers in the morning, or like something, that's sort of like, like he's those sorts of parallels are like little bits of action that could make a difference. But you could do the same thing in a fight scene, or you could do the same thing in a sex scene, obviously. I mean, that's the easiest one, right? Because you've got a relationship between two characters playing out, right there. But like those sorts of things, you could go towards it. Or like if your theme is like something hard to live up to, right? So like I was thinking, this one reminded me of Hemingway, not necessarily something specific, but sort of all of it. So like he typically advocated for sort of stoic behavior, right? Like control, like be the best person you could be, but you could only control yourself, not other things, right?
Right.
But not that I can think of the exact example right now, but he's got situations where it's easier for the character to get upset and angry than it is for the character to maintain his composure. And that's the sort of thing where you're tempting your character essentially as the author. You're saying like, look how easy it is to do the bad thing. Look how easy it is to do the wrong thing. And like only through maybe doing the wrong thing or confronting the possibility of the wrong thing can your character actually learn. Or maybe by doing the wrong thing and falling, in tragedy, the reader can learn.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as with setting, we have to keep coming back to the question of how does this movement, this moment in the story, advance the theme? And that's through the character's arc. And is the character learning or failing to learn? But what are we showing the reader through this character's passage through this event, this plot point, right?
Yeah. I think the other thing that you can do with action, what I find doing, what I do a lot when I'm revising action scenes, or like choreographed scenes, right? Scenes where action features is moving things around so that the flow of dialogue and description and action, they're all leading the same way, right? So adjusting the action so that it's like part of the discussion in a sense. So it depends on what the scene is. Like it could be, for instance, in Underworld, I've got two characters in a tree and they're moving closer and further away from each other over the course of the scene. And that's sort of like the general movement is like when they start to understand one another, they get closer, and when they, cease understanding one another, they get further away. And it's like a little thing. And I mean, saying it like this makes it sound pretty dumb, but in the scene you don't notice it so much. It's just a little bit of texture added to the discussion that makes you feel it more. And I think that like there's a lot that you can do with a little, especially like in the place that you would normally put a dialogue tag, right? That's a key place for just a little something.
Yeah. And I think action and dialogue overlap because typically we have dialogue in the midst of an action scene where we've got two characters or more interacting. And what you were just saying made me think of theater. Something I often ask the writers I work with is, how would this play out on the stage of the page? You've got to sort of leave your mental processing and think about the performative aspect of it. So as your reader is reading it, it's not just he said, she said, he said, she said. It's what would, if this were being performed on a stage, what would the actor bring to it? So in that example of the two characters getting closer and further together, there could be the tilt of shoulders, there could be taking a step back, there could be, reaching out to put a hand on an arm. So all of those little gestures, for us, that is action. You're putting action on the page, and you're also adding layers of subtext to the dialogue, and you're showing the reader those movements that can then inform the unspoken, fill in the space between words, and also bring that theme to life, right? Addressing it with subtlety and nuance. Nodding heads words. Play well on podcasts, so I'll just fill the gap here. Heads are nodding.
Yeah, so while you were talking about it, I think it reminded me that we should try to because ultimately we do a lot of things with words and stories, right? And we have we have subtext between characters, we have symbols, we have the character's journey, and we've got the theme, and we're like all of these are vying for that that space of meaning in behind the words, right? And so I don't think that there's necessarily any difference between expressing them in. Hey, Robert.
Carry on.
I don't think there's any. I don't think there's necessarily any difference in which you express or how you express any given one of those things. But I think that what it reminded me of was that in the example I gave in Underworld, the two characters moving closer and further apart on the tree, the theme of the story is truth will set you free, right? And so they're getting closer and further away from telling one another the truth about themselves. And that's the part where I think it's theme being expressed rather than some other thing. And, again, I think that no matter what you're expressing, the technique that you get it through the words is the same. Just as a way of showing how you could actually do it with theme and not with not character journey or subtext between characters or that sort of thing.
Right. Okay, so you just said that the thematic content of that piece of dialogue is that the characters are getting closer to or further from expressing the truth to themselves, correct?
To one another.
To one another. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they approach almost telling their truth to one another, and then they
veer away from it.
Yeah. That example is really a good one because, like you said, you have all these things that you're doing with words, right? You're doing the subtext, you're doing the character development. So you've got literally your theme because they're trying to tell the truth. You've got dialogue interaction between the two characters. You've got the subtext of them moving actually closer, physically further apart, and it's all working together to give that cohesive thing. So I know sometimes we like to pull things out and say, think about this or think about that, but like the way that you described that perfectly shows how it all interconnects, and it's not necessarily as many moving parts, thank you, Aria, as it sounds like to begin with.
Well, yes. I think when you've got a good story or even just a good scene, all of that stuff naturally comes together, right? I'm sure that like when you read good work, you see lots of those things going on at once. It's I think it's just the thing that we should aspire towards, not necessarily,
Yeah. So, but in your revision pass, though, what we're saying is that if you're thinking about your theme, right, that's the top of your mind as you're looking at this action or as you're looking at this dialogue, like that can help you to revise everything to be tighter to the theme itself, even as you're messing around with the subtext and the character relationships and things like that, right?
Yeah, I think that you're totally right with that, and I think that that's probably why I end up revising more times than average, because I like to try to make sure that each one of those things gets good, gets a bit of time, to sort of like bubble to the surface, I guess.
Yeah.
And having come in late to that as well, just thinking about the complexity of going through several times, I think it's one of the things that makes a work stand out more than any other is when you can see that deft touch has been applied through multiple layers. And I was reading Stephen Pressfield's, one of his jabs about theme last night, actually, just purely coincidentally, and he was making the point that there's many great books, but the ones that tend to stick with us, and movies, the ones that tend to stick with us actually do have a theme, and isn't necessarily pushed heavy-handedly, but it's something that sticks in your mind, whether it's a heroic journey or whether it's a redemption story, or we can name them even. It's a redemption story. Oh, it's about love gone wrong. Oh, it's So I think the moment you can say that it's about something or whatever the controlling idea is, I think Pressfield's idea is that you write that on a post-it note and slam it onto your computer, and don't let anything go on the page without it identifying with that.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And
that's awesome.
That dovetails beautifully with what Mike has been saying about keeping theme front of mind. So we'll all have Post-it notes on our computers tomorrow identifying our theme. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.